Last week, I stopped making music altogether for one whole week and just created. It was an experiment to see if I could batch create content and really hit a flow state and just do it for a week to promote my new single. By the end of this video, you're gonna see if it was worth it or if I should have spent my time making music instead. First off, it took way longer than I thought to get these shots, shooting by myself, not having any help. Self-filming is inherently difficult, and setting the shot up, picking up the right lens, adjusting the lighting, returning to your original position, nailing the focus, especially if you're using vintage or manual lenses, and fitting tripods into a tight studio with just the right lens to get the right shot. So difficult. Just getting the best possible angle, the most compelling shots, that alone takes hours just to set that up. And it's also very easy to overcomplicate things. It's easy to compare and tinker, swapping out different lenses, trying out manual vintage lenses, trying out special autofocus lenses, trying wider lenses, which you need in a tighter space like this. If you've got those manual lenses, you got to manually focus. So unless you have a body double standing in for you, much more difficult. You got to set marks, maybe you could measure it, you could put a dummy body in, but it is harder than you think, and you have to get up, readjust, get back to your position, keep that flow going. One of my videos, I was shooting outdoors on a slope in my backyard in broad daylight. So A, that's super difficult with hard lighting, very hard to fix in post. You have to do a ton of adjustments. And B, it was a slope at an angle. So just getting the camera level out there, even though there's more space to work with than here in the studio, very difficult. There's also other technical challenges you run into inside because of the lack of space. You need to be able to monitor what you're doing. You need to have power and you need to have enough space. So just wrangling the drives, having enough data ready to go, make sure your drives aren't full, is a big deal. One of my videos, I wanted to do a multicam shot, which is obviously overcomplicating things, but I wanted to try it out, see what happened, and it took much longer than I expected. It's not too bad syncing up the shots. I thought that would be the hardest part. The hardest part is just getting the right angles and the right lighting for a multiple angle shot. One big consideration, do I want to be shooting this wide and in landscape for YouTube? Do I want this to be vertical? Do I need to shoot super wide to get be able to pull a vertical crop out of that later on for TikTok and Instagram Reels? One of the videos I was working on was a POV walk around in the studio, and I wanted to show people what it was like hands-free to walk around, feel like they're me in the studio, tweaking the knobs on synths, playing keyboards without having to have Meta Ray-Ban glasses capturing it, some other kind of camera. So I tried 3 different methods. I tried with the iPhone, strapped to my chest. I tried with an Insta360 camera, and I tried with a Sony camera, the one I'm filming with right now, an A7 IV on a DJI gimbal. Quickly found out that a gimbal is very hard to hold with one hand while you're playing keyboards, very hard to stabilize that shot. And when you're stabilizing it later on, you're gonna be cropping it in even more. So really hard to get that shot. It was just super shaky. The stabilized footage was okay, it was barely usable, but you're cropping in a lot on that. And the iPhone doesn't have that mojo, doesn't have that feel to it. It's a real trade-off. Every tool has a different optimal purpose for it. With the iPhone, everything's automatic. Unless you're using the Blackmagic camera app, you don't have as much control over the focus and the aperture and things like that. So you don't get the mojo. It's so much easier to film. It's stabilized with the iPhone. Maybe somewhere in the middle, the Insta360 had a better image quality to it. I could edit and spin the camera around and add keyframes, jump to certain parts of the shot. So I've been using that for live shows when I don't have a videographer with me, and that helps me capture shots from shows and edit it later on. So that works pretty well, and it also allows for an easy export of vertical. So Insta360, handy for certain applications. You get these weird artifacts though if you're off the plane of focus between the 2 lenses. So you have to avoid that. It can look weird, but those shots are pretty well stabilized. I think that is a better camera for action sports, being outside. So maybe the iPhone is the winner on this one, but I was able to get that POV shot that I wanted, and it looked great, and it was not with the Sony camera. So Sony is great for locked off shots, but selfies pretty tough unless you have a really, really wide lens and you are able to stabilize it sufficiently. You know, the biggest issue in here was space and just getting enough room. And the problem with tripods are that you're limited to ground space and bumping into things, knocking into stuff. So I'd like a solution where there's tripods mounted to the ceiling where I could bend them like booms. I've had some of these clamp boom arms that are really nice, almost like a mic boom. Those are helpful on desks. But man, it would just be better to have that thing plugged into the ceiling and I could position it spring-loaded, properly dampened, and be able to just position that way because the floor is busy. There's tons of other cables, obstacles on the floor in the studio. So I think someone will come up with some better ceiling mounts. Maybe if you design a studio from the ground up for both music and video, you can do ceiling mounts. Maybe that's the way to do it. I don't know. Got one overhead shot here I do for my live streams. It's super helpful. No other way to get that angle than to mount it on the ceiling, especially if it's a lightweight camera. That works pretty well, but for heavier cameras, maybe there's a better solution. Other takeaways, I think the biggest thing I noticed was that if you're a solo operator doing everything yourself, you're gonna get much less done in a day. I could have created 3 songs a day for 5 days. Instead of creating 8 pieces of social media content, I could have had 15 songs, 15 rough ideas. It's just a different process. It's using a different part of your brain. You know, creating videos is satisfying and I like the editing process. It feels like working in another DAW. But making music is more gratifying and I get into that flow state. I love that feel and that creative rush and the drugs that your brain create when you get into that flow state. That's your job, is being able to just tune everything out and focus on music and then come out of that flow state and be sort of a sober editor later on. I miss that part of the process. Obviously, I'm not going to choose videography over music. I love learning both sides of the coin, and you have to learn how to present your music in different and compelling ways. Creating videos is so intentional. There's so much setup time. It feels way less spontaneous and it feels way less of a flow state. Maybe you get in a flow state in editing, but everything feels very intentional and pre-planned. Feels a little less like work to make music, even though I love both. So overall, I think the takeaway is best practice is spend a day or 2 max batching your content. Really get those videos in. Don't take away too much time from your main creative craft because you're working so intentionally in video. Have a clear outline. Have that in place to follow each time so you're not reinventing the wheel and building a new instrument from scratch every time. For some people, maybe a week straight of shooting videos will work best for them. And I've heard of people saying that they're in their content creation phase and they stay in that phase and then they're back in their album creation phase and their tour phase and they block it off. But not everybody has that luxury. That's incredible self-discipline as well. I like to spend most of my time making music, and you got to choose. What do you want to spend most of your time doing? You have to do a little of both, but I like to spend more time creating music.